I never thought I'd be standing on my own front porch at 2:30 in the afternoon, holding a cardboard box of my belongings while my son's new wife smirked at me through the window I'd cleaned 1,000 times. The lock had been changed. After 34 years of calling this place home, I was being treated like an unwelcome stranger. But what my son Marcus didn't know was that his mother wasn't quite as helpless as he thought. In fact, there were a few things about this house that might surprise him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and at 57 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. I'd raised my son Marcus as a single mother after his father walked out when Marcus was just 3 years old. We'd been a team, him and me, against the world. I worked double shifts as a nursing supervisor at St. Mary's Hospital to keep us afloat, and every penny I saved went toward building a better life for us both. The modest 2-story colonial house on Maple Street had been our sanctuary, our safe haven, our proof that hard work could create something beautiful. I remember the day we moved into that house like it was yesterday. Marcus was 8 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, and he ran through every room claiming territories. "This is my room, Mom. This is where I'm going to put my baseball cards." He'd been so excited about having his own space, about finally living somewhere that felt permanent. I'd saved for 3 years to put together the down payment, working extra shifts and eating more ramen noodles than any human should consume. But seeing his face light up when he realized we weren't just visiting, that this was actually our home, made every sacrifice worth it. The house itself was nothing spectacular when we first bought it. Built in 1962, it had good bones but needed plenty of work. The wallpaper in the kitchen was a hideous orange and brown floral pattern that probably seemed stylish in the 70s. The hardwood floors were scratched and dull from years of neglect. The front porch sagged slightly on one side and the garden was overgrown with weeds. But I saw potential where others saw problems. Over the years, I transformed that house room by room. I learned to install tile by watching YouTube videos on my laptop after Marcus went to bed. I painted every wall myself, sometimes twice when I decided I didn't like the color. I spent weekends at garage sales and estate sales, hunting for pieces that could be refinished or repurposed. The kitchen got new cabinets that I painted sage green, and I saved for 2 years to replace the ugly linoleum with beautiful ceramic tile that looked like natural stone. Marcus grew up helping me with these projects, though his definition of helping often involved more hindrance than assistance. He'd hold the flashlight while I fixed a leaky faucet, usually pointing it everywhere except where I needed it. He'd hand me screws when I was hanging pictures, dropping half of them in the process. But those were some of our best times together, working side by side to make our house truly feel like home. The living room became our evening sanctuary. I found a beautiful burgundy leather sofa at an estate sale for $50. It had a small tear on one arm, but I learned to repair leather from a YouTube tutorial, and soon it looked better than new. I refinished an old coffee table that had been my grandmother's, stripping away layers of paint to reveal gorgeous oak underneath. The fireplace, which hadn't worked when we moved in, became functional again after I hired a chimney sweep and learned to build proper fires. Many winter evenings were spent there, Marcus doing homework while I read nursing journals or planned the next home improvement project. His bedroom evolved as he grew. The walls went from cartoon characters to sports heroes, to a more mature blue that he picked out when he turned 16. I let him choose his own bedding and curtains, wanting him to feel ownership over his space. When he expressed interest in music, I surprised him with an electric guitar for his 14th birthday, along with a small amplifier that he promised to keep at reasonable volumes. He kept that promise about 60% of the time. The master bedroom was my retreat. I painted it a soft lavender color that reminded me of the lilac bushes my grandmother had grown. I found a beautiful antique dresser at a flea market and spent weeks refinishing it, sanding away decades of wear and staining it to match the bed frame I'd inherited from my mother. I hung sheer white curtains that let in the morning light but still provided privacy. It was a peaceful space where I could decompress after difficult shifts at the hospital. But my pride and joy was the kitchen. I spent 3 summers completely renovating it, doing most of the work myself with help from my neighbor Frank, who was handy with electrical work. I installed new cabinets, painted them a warm cream color, and added brushed nickel hardware that caught the light beautifully. The countertops were a splurge, quartz that looked like marble but was more practical for daily use. I found a vintage farmhouse sink at an architectural salvage yard and convinced Frank to help me install it. The backsplash was subway tile that I laid myself, grouting it perfectly straight after 3 practice attempts on a piece of plywood in the garage. That kitchen was where Marcus and I shared thousands of meals together. I taught him to cook in that space, starting with scrambled eggs when he was 10 and progressing to full meals by the time he was in high school. We'd stand side by side making Sunday morning pancakes, him invariably getting more batter on the counter than in the pan. During his teenage years, when conversation didn't come easily, cooking together gave us a way to connect without the pressure of forced dialogue. The dining room held our most important family moments. I'd found a solid oak table at an estate sale, scarred and beaten but structurally sound. I spent weeks stripping and refinishing it, bringing out the beautiful grain of the wood. It seated 6 comfortably, though for most of Marcus's childhood, it was just the 2 of us at one end, sharing daily debriefs over dinner. I made it a rule that we ate together whenever possible, no television, no phones, just conversation about our days. The upstairs bathroom got a complete makeover when Marcus was in middle school. The original pink tile and fixtures were replaced with clean white subway tile and brushed nickel finishes. I learned to install a new vanity and toilet, though I did call a plumber for the more complex plumbing work. Marcus complained about losing the retro pink bathroom, but I think he was secretly relieved to have a space that looked more grown-up. The basement was Marcus's domain during his high school years. I finished half of it as a recreation room, installing laminate flooring and painting the concrete walls a neutral beige. I found a used pool table that needed new felt, and Marcus and his friends spent countless hours down there, the sound of their laughter drifting up through the heating vents. I didn't mind the noise. It meant he was home and safe, and his friends were always respectful and polite. The backyard was my outdoor sanctuary. I planted flower beds along the fence line, choosing perennials that would come back year after year. There were hostas for the shady areas under the big oak tree, and sunflowers that grew tall along the back fence. I installed a small patio with pavers I laid myself, creating a perfect spot for morning coffee in good weather. Marcus helped me plant a vegetable garden one spring, though his enthusiasm waned considerably when he realized how much weeding was involved. Every improvement, every renovation, every small detail was chosen with love and care. This wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of providing for my son. It was stability and security made tangible, proof that a single mother could create something beautiful and lasting. Marcus thrived in that environment. He brought friends home regularly, and I loved hearing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
A house filled with young voices and laughter. I was the mom who always had snacks available and who didn't mind if the living room furniture got rearranged for video game tournaments. His friends called me Mrs. H and always seemed comfortable in our home. I took pride in creating a space where Marcus felt confident, bringing people, where he never had to apologize for our circumstances or feel embarrassed about where he lived. Through his elementary and middle school years, Marcus and I maintained our close relationship. He'd tell me about his crushes, his friendship dramas, his worries about tests and teachers. I attended every school event, every baseball game, every awards ceremony. I was room mother more times than I could count, organizing class parties and field trip volunteers. Other parents knew they could count on Eleanor Hartwell to show up and pitch in. High school brought the expected teenage distance, but even then, Marcus remained fundamentally sweet and respectful. He had his moods and his moments of attitude, but he never crossed major lines. He did his chores without too much complaining, kept his grades up, and usually remembered to call if he was going to be late coming home. His curfew violations were minor and infrequent. His rebellion phase involved wearing his jeans a little too low and playing his music a little too loud, hardly the stuff of parental nightmares. I was proud of the young man he was becoming, He was kind to younger students, respectful to teachers, and loyal to his friends. He worked part-time at the local grocery store during his junior and senior years, saving money for college and car insurance. He never asked for expensive brand-name clothes or the latest gadgets, understanding without being told that money was always somewhat tight. When he wanted something special, he found ways to earn it himself. College was always the plan. I'd been saving for his education since he was born, putting away whatever I could in a special account that I never touched for anything else. We toured several schools together during his junior year, and he ultimately chose State University, about 3 hours away. It was close enough that he could come home for holidays and long weekends, but far enough that he'd have the full college experience of independence and self-reliance. The day we moved him into his freshman dorm was bittersweet. I helped him organize his closet and set up his desk area while his roommate's family did the same on the other side of the small room. When it was time for parents to leave, Marcus walked me to my car in the parking lot. We stood there for a moment, both of us emotional, but trying not to show it too much. "Mom," he said, his voice a little shaky, "thank you for everything. For the house, for all the sacrifices. For making me feel like we could handle anything as long as we stuck together." I hugged him tight, memorizing the feeling of his arms around me. "You're going to do great things, Marcus. I'm so proud of who you've become." "I'll call you this weekend," he promised. "Don't feel like you have to check in constantly," I told him, though privately I hoped he would. "This is your time to spread your wings." Driving home to the empty house was harder than I had expected. For the first time in 18 years, I was truly alone. The silence felt overwhelming, after so many years of Marcus's presence filling the spaces. I walked through each room, remembering different phases of his childhood, different projects we'd worked on together, different conversations we'd had in each space. But I adjusted to the empty nest phase more easily than I'd feared. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts and taking on additional responsibilities. I started reading again, something I'd had little time for during Marcus's busy high school years. I reconnected with some old friends who were also experiencing the transition to empty nest life. I even took a pottery class at the community center, discovering a hidden talent for creating beautiful, functional pieces. Marcus called regularly during his freshman year, usually on Sunday evenings. He'd tell me about his classes, his professors, his roommate, and the friends he was making. He seemed to be thriving academically and socially. He joined the campus photography club and discovered a passion for capturing nature scenes. During his spring break visit home, he showed me hundreds of photos he'd taken around campus and during weekend trips with friends. "These are beautiful, Marcus," I told him, genuinely impressed by his artistic eye. "Have you thought about taking some formal photography classes?" "Maybe as electives," he said. "But I'm sticking with business as my major. It's more practical for finding a good job after graduation." I supported his practical approach while encouraging his artistic interests. I even converted the small spare bedroom into a darkroom for him, learning about photo development processes and buying the necessary equipment as a surprise for his 19th birthday. He was thrilled with the gift and spent much of his summer break that year experimenting with different techniques and printing his favorite shots. Sophomore year brought new challenges and growth. Marcus joined a business fraternity and took on leadership roles in the photography club. His grades remained strong, and he seemed to be building a solid foundation for his future career. He brought friends home occasionally during breaks, and I enjoyed meeting the people who were becoming important in his life. It was during his junior year that he first mentioned Ashley. She appeared in his conversations gradually, first as just another name among his circle of friends, then more frequently as someone he was studying with, then clearly as something more significant. "Ashley and I are thinking about driving down to the coast next weekend," he mentioned during one of our Sunday calls. "That sounds fun," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral and interested rather than overly curious. "Is this the same Ashley you mentioned last week?" "Yeah, we've been hanging out a lot lately. She's really smart, Mom. She's majoring in marketing, and she has all these great ideas about combining business and creative fields." I could hear the enthusiasm in his voice, the particular tone that indicated this was more than just casual friendship. I was happy for him while also feeling the natural maternal concern about whether this girl would be good enough for my wonderful son. "I'd love to meet her sometime," I said. "Actually, I was thinking about bringing her home for Mom's weekend in October, if that's okay with you." Mom's weekend was a special tradition we'd established during his freshman year. Since the university had family weekends designed for parents to visit campus, I'd created our own tradition, where Marcus came home for a long weekend, just the two of us, to reconnect and catch up without the distractions of his college social life. "Of course she can come," I said, though I felt a small pang at the thought of our special tradition changing. "I'll make sure the guest room is ready." That October weekend was my first real introduction to Ashley Morrison. She was undeniably beautiful, with long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and the kind of effortless style that suggested money and privilege. She was polite to me, though I detected a certain coolness in her demeanor, as if she was evaluating me and finding me somewhat lacking. During dinner on Friday night, I asked about her family and background, genuinely interested in learning about the girl who was clearly important to Marcus. "My parents live in Westchester County," she said. "My father is in investment banking, and my mother is involved in several charitable organizations." "That sounds lovely," I replied. "Do you have siblings?" "A younger brother who's finishing prep school this year. He'll probably go to Yale or Princeton." I noticed she didn't ask anything about my background or family, didn't seem curious about Marcus's childhood or how we'd ended up in this house. She complimented the food I'd prepared, but in a way that felt obligatory rather than sincere. Marcus seemed oblivious to any undercurrents, clearly smitten with Ashley and eager for us to like each other. He pointed out improvements I'd made to the house over the years, telling Ashley about projects we'd worked on together, obviously proud of what we'd accomplished. "Your mom is amazing," he told Ashley. "She basically built this place with her own two hands." Ashley smiled politely but didn't seem particularly impressed. I caught her looking around with what appeared to be mild disdain, though she was careful not to let Marcus see her expression. Saturday morning, I made my special weekend breakfast: pancakes with fresh berries and real maple syrup, turkey sausage, and fresh orange juice. Marcus had always loved these elaborate weekend breakfasts, and I wanted to share this tradition with Ashley. "This is delicious, Mrs. Hartwell," Ashley said, though I noticed she ate very little. "Marcus talks about your cooking all the time." "Thank you, dear. Marcus has always been my best customer and my toughest critic. If something passes his taste test, I know it's good." After breakfast, I suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood so Ashley could see more of the area where Marcus had grown up. The October weather was perfect, crisp, and clear, with the leaves just starting to turn. "This is where Marcus learned to ride his bike," I said, pointing to the gentle slope of Maple Street. "He crashed into Mrs. Patterson's flower bed 3 times before he finally got the hang of it." "Mom," Marcus protested, laughing. "You don't need to tell her all my embarrassing childhood stories." "I think it's sweet," Ashley said, but her tone suggested she found it anything but sweet. We walked past the elementary school Marcus had attended, the small park where he'd played Little League baseball, the corner store where I'd let him buy candy with his allowance. Each location triggered memories that I shared enthusiastically, wanting Ashley to understand the context of Marcus's upbringing, the community that had helped shape him. But I began to realize that Ashley wasn't interested in these stories. If anything, she seemed to view them as evidence of a small, limited world that she was eager to help Marcus escape. When we passed the hospital where I worked, she didn't ask about my career or show any curiosity about what I did there. Sunday morning, Ashley announced that she had a sorority event to attend and needed to get back to campus earlier than planned. Marcus was disappointed but understanding, offering to drive her back so she wouldn't miss her obligation. "It was lovely meeting you, Mrs. Hartwell," Ashley said as they prepared to leave. "Thank you for having me." "You're welcome anytime, dear," I replied, meaning it despite my reservations. After they left, the house felt particularly quiet. I cleaned up the guest room, washed the extra dishes, and tried to sort through my feelings about Ashley. It wasn't that she'd been rude or inappropriate. She'd been perfectly polite. But there was something about her attitude that troubled me. A sense that she looked down on our lifestyle, our neighborhood, our modest circumstances. I told myself I was being overly protective, reading too much into simple personality differences. Marcus was clearly happy with her, and that was what mattered most. Different people came from different backgrounds, and Ashley's reserved demeanor might simply reflect unfamiliarity with our more casual, down-to-earth approach to life. Over the following months, Ashley became a regular presence in Marcus's life and conversations. He'd mentioned study sessions they attended together, social events they went to as a couple, weekend trips they took with other friends. She was clearly becoming important to him, and I made an effort to be supportive and positive whenever he talked about her. Spring break of his junior year, Marcus brought Ashley home again. This time, she seemed more comfortable, though I still detected that subtle sense of superiority in her interactions with me. She was friendly enough, but it felt performative, as if she was playing the role of the gracious girlfriend meeting her boyfriend's family. During that visit, I overheard a conversation that concerned me. Marcus was showing Ashley photo albums from his childhood, and she was making comments that struck me as dismissive. "You were such a cute little boy," she said, but her tone suggested she found his childhood quaint, rather than endearing. "It's amazing how far you've come." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "Oh, just that you've grown so much since then. College has really opened your eyes to bigger possibilities, hasn't it?" I continued folding laundry in the next room, but I could hear every word through the thin walls. "I had a good childhood," Marcus said, sounding slightly defensive. "My mom worked really hard to give me opportunities." "Of course she did," Ashley replied quickly. "I didn't mean anything negative. It's just exciting to think about all the places you'll go and things you'll accomplish. You have so much potential." Her words weren't explicitly critical, but the implication was clear. She saw his current circumstances as something to be transcended rather than appreciated. She was positioning herself as the catalyst for his escape from a life she deemed insufficient. That summer, Marcus stayed on campus to take additional classes and work at an internship Ashley had helped him secure through her father's connections. It was the first summer since he'd started college that he didn't spend significant time at home, and I missed him terribly. Our Sunday phone calls continued, but they became shorter and less frequent as his schedule filled with work, summer classes, and social activities with Ashley and her circle of friends. When he did come home for a brief visit in August, I noticed changes in him that concerned me. He seemed restless in the house, critical of things that had never bothered him before. He commented that the living room furniture looked dated, that the kitchen could use updating, that the neighborhood seemed quote, kind of boring after the excitement of college life. "Marcus," I said gently, "this house has been our home for over 15 years. These rooms hold so many good memories." "I know, Mom," he replied, but his tone was dismissive. "I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. It's just that I'm used to different things now." Different things, like Ashley's family's lifestyle, I assumed. Like the world she was introducing him to, where modest homes in working-class neighborhoods were seen as starting points to be quickly abandoned, rather than achievements to be proud of. Senior year brought talk of post-graduation plans. Marcus would be graduating in May with a business degree and excellent grades. He'd been interviewing for entry-level positions with several companies, and the job market looked promising for someone with his qualifications. During Christmas break, he and Ashley announced that they were engaged. They'd been dating for over a year and a half, and Marcus seemed absolutely certain that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, hugging him tightly. "I'm so happy for you." And I was happy for him, despite my reservations about Ashley. Marcus deserved love and companionship, and if Ashley made him happy, then I would support their relationship wholeheartedly. "We're thinking about a summer wedding," Ashley said, showing me the impressive diamond ring Marcus had somehow managed to afford. Nothing too elaborate, just close family and friends. They spent the rest of Christmas break planning their future together. Ashley had already secured a marketing position with a firm in the city, about an hour's drive from our town. Marcus was interviewing for positions in the same area, hoping to find something that would allow them to live together after graduation. "Where are you thinking of living?" I asked during one of our planning conversations. "We're looking at apartments in the city," Marcus said. "Ashley knows the area well, and there are good opportunities there for both of us." I felt a pang of sadness at the thought of Marcus moving so far away, but I understood that young couples needed to build their own lives. An hour's drive wasn't insurmountable. We could still see each other regularly for family dinners and holidays. "That sounds wonderful," I said. You'll have to bring me apartment hunting with you sometime so I can see what you're considering. Ashley and Marcus exchanged a quick glance that I almost missed. Actually, Mom, Marcus said, we've already put a deposit down on a place. Ashley found this great apartment through a friend of her family. It worked out perfectly. I tried not to feel hurt that they'd made such an important decision without including me, even peripherally. They were adults making their own choices, and I needed to respect their independence. Spring semester flew by in a blur of final classes, job interviews, and wedding planning. Marcus accepted a position with a consulting firm that offered excellent benefits and growth potential. Ashley's marketing job was with a prestigious agency that represented major brands. They seemed to be building exactly the kind of successful, upwardly mobile life that Ashley had always envisioned. The wedding was planned for July, giving them time to settle into their new jobs and apartment before the ceremony. Ashley's family was handling most of the arrangements, which was generous of them but left me feeling somewhat peripheral to the process. I offered to help with flowers or catering or any other details, but Ashley's mother had everything well in hand. It's so nice that Mrs. Morrison is able to take care of everything, I told Marcus during one of our phone calls. But please let me know if there's anything specific I can contribute. Actually, Mom, there is something, Marcus said. Ashley and I have been talking, and we were wondering if you'd be willing to help us out with something after the wedding. Of course, sweetheart. What do you need? Well, we love our apartment, but we're thinking long-term about buying a house. Building equity instead of paying rent, you know? And we were wondering if you'd consider letting us live in the house for a while, just until we can save up for a down payment on our own place. I was quiet for a moment, processing his request. The idea of having Marcus back home, even temporarily, was appealing. But I was concerned about how Ashley would feel about living in the house she'd seemed so dismissive of during her visits. How does Ashley feel about that idea? I asked. She's actually the one who suggested it, Marcus said, which surprised me. She thinks it would be smart financially for us to save money on rent while we're building our careers. Where would I live? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Well, that's the thing. The house isn't really big enough for all three of us, especially once Ashley and I are married. We were thinking maybe you could find a small apartment somewhere nearby, and we could take over the house payments and maintenance and everything. My heart sank as I realized what they were really asking. They didn't want to live with me. They wanted me to move out so they could live in my house. The house I'd spent nearly 2 decades turning into a home for Marcus and me. Marcus, I said carefully, this house is my home. I've put everything I have into making it what it is. I know Mom and Ashley, and I totally appreciate that. We're not asking you to give it up permanently or anything. We just thought it might work out well for everyone. You've always said the house is too big for just you now that I'm gone. It was true that I'd mentioned the house feeling large with just me rattling around in it. But there was a difference between acknowledging that reality and wanting to be displaced from my own home. Let me think about it, I said. It's a big decision. Of course, Marcus said. Take all the time you need. We just wanted to put the idea out there. After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking around at everything I'd built over the years. Every piece of furniture, every paint color, every improvement represented years of work and sacrifice. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the physical manifestation of my life's work as a mother and a homeowner. But Marcus was my son, and I wanted to help him and Ashley get started in their marriage. Maybe this arrangement could work if we structured it properly. I could find a nice apartment nearby, and they could take over the house temporarily while they saved for their own place. It wouldn't be permanent, and it would give them a significant financial advantage during the early years of their marriage. Over the following weeks, I researched rental apartments in the area. Most were significantly smaller than my house and cost more than I was currently paying for my mortgage and utilities. But there were a few options that seemed reasonable, and I began to warm to the idea of downsizing to something more manageable. I called Marcus to discuss the practical details of his proposal. I've been looking at apartments, I told him. There are some nice options available, but we'd need to work out the financial arrangements carefully. The mortgage payments, insurance, utilities, maintenance costs. Absolutely, Marcus said, sounding relieved that I was considering the idea seriously. Ashley and I have been doing some research too. We could cover all the regular expenses. and maybe pay you a little extra each month to help with your apartment rent. We spent several phone calls working through the logistics. They would take over the mortgage payments and all utility bills. They would handle routine maintenance and repairs. I would continue to own the house, but they would essentially rent it from me at a rate that covered all expenses plus a small amount toward my new housing costs. On paper, it seemed like a reasonable arrangement. I would be helping my son and new daughter-in-law get established financially while transitioning to a living situation that better suited my empty nest lifestyle. And it wasn't permanent. Once they saved enough for their own down payment, they would move out and I could decide whether to move back into the house or sell it and use the proceeds to buy something smaller. Graduation day was a proud moment for me. Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, and I cheered loudly from the audience. Ashley's family was there too, a large contingent of well-dressed relatives who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. I felt slightly underdressed in my department store dress and modest jewelry, but I was too proud of Marcus to care about appearances. After the ceremony, we all went to dinner at an upscale restaurant Ashley's parents had chosen. I found myself seated at one end of the long table, somewhat separated from the main conversation. Ashley's relatives talked about people and places I didn't know, referencing exclusive clubs and expensive vacations with casual familiarity. I smiled and nodded when appropriate but felt increasingly out of place as the evening progressed. Marcus seemed to fit seamlessly into Ashley's family dynamic. He laughed at their jokes, contributed to their conversations about golf courses and wine vintages, and generally appeared comfortable in their sophisticated world. I was proud of his adaptability but also saddened by how easily he seemed to be leaving his old life behind. The wedding in July was beautiful but felt more like Ashley's family's event than a celebration of Marcus and Ashley as a couple. The venue was an exclusive country club, the flowers were elaborate and expensive, and the guest list was heavy on Ashley's relatives and family friends. I knew only a handful of people there, a few of Marcus's college friends and my neighbor Frank, who Marcus had insisted on inviting despite Ashley's obvious reluctance. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, spending more than I usually would on clothes because I wanted to look appropriate for the formal setting. But even in my best outfit, I felt like an outsider among Ashley's glamorous relatives. The conversation at my assigned table revolved around topics I had little knowledge of or interest in: stock portfolios, European vacations, private school selections for children who hadn't been born yet. During the reception, I watched Marcus dance with Ashley, both of them glowing with happiness. Whatever my reservations about Ashley, there was no denying that Marcus loved her deeply. He looked at her with such adoration, such complete devotion, that I pushed aside my concerns and focused on his joy. When it came time for the traditional mother-son dance, Marcus found me at my table and led me onto the dance floor. "Thank you for everything, Mom," he said as we swayed to the music. "For raising me, for supporting me, for helping Ashley and me get started in our marriage." "You don't need to thank me for loving you," I replied, fighting back tears. "That's what mothers do." "I know this transition hasn't been easy for you," he continued, "moving out of the house and everything. But it's going to work out great for all of us. You'll see." I nodded and smiled, not trusting my voice to remain steady. The song ended, and Marcus kissed my cheek before returning to Ashley and her family. I sat back down at my table and watched the rest of the reception from my peripheral position, already feeling like I was being eased out of the central role I'd played in Marcus's life for 22 years. After the honeymoon, Marcus and Ashley moved into my house while I relocated to a small one-bedroom apartment across town. The apartment was nice enough, with modern appliances and decent natural light, but it felt temporary and impersonal compared to the home I'd spent decades creating. The transition was more difficult than I'd anticipated. I'd underestimated how much of my identity was tied to that house, how much comfort I derived from being surrounded by familiar objects and spaces I'd designed and decorated myself. The apartment came furnished, so most of my belongings went into storage. I kept only the essentials and a few sentimental items, but everything felt displaced and temporary. Marcus and Ashley seemed to settle into the house easily. When I visited for Sunday dinners, which became our new tradition, I could see they were making changes. Small things at first. New throw pillows on the sofa, different artwork on the walls, a modern coffee maker to replace my old but perfectly functional one. "Ashley has such great taste," Marcus said proudly, showing me a new lamp she'd bought for the living room. She's helping me see the house with fresh eyes. I smiled and complimented the lamp, though privately I thought it looked out of place with the rest of the room's decor. But they were living there now, and they had every right to make the space feel like their own. As autumn progressed, the changes became more significant. They replaced my carefully chosen curtains with sleek modern blinds. They moved furniture around, creating a more contemporary layout that eliminated some of my favorite cozy conversation areas. They painted the accent wall in the dining room a bold gray color that I found stark and unwelcoming. "We're just updating things a bit," Ashley explained when I commented on how different everything looked, making it feel more current. I bit my tongue and nodded, reminding myself that this was temporary. They were young and entitled to their own preferences. When they eventually moved out, I could change things back if I wanted to. But the changes continued through the winter and into spring. They replaced my grandmother's antique dining table with a modern glass-topped piece that had no warmth or character. They took down family photos that had hung in the hallway for years, replacing them with abstract art that matched their new aesthetic. They even painted over the sage green kitchen cabinets I'd spent so much time perfecting, choosing instead a stark white that made the space feel cold and sterile. Each change felt like a small betrayal, a rejection of everything I'd put into creating that home. But when I expressed concern about the pace and extent of the modifications, Marcus dismissed my feelings. "Mom, Ashley and I are planning to live here for at least a couple more years while we save for our own place. We need it to feel like home to us. You said yourself that the house needed updating." "I never said it needed updating," I protested. "I said it felt big with just me living there." "Same thing," Marcus replied, clearly not seeing the distinction that was so important to me. I found myself visiting less frequently, uncomfortable with seeing my beloved home transformed into something unrecognizable. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in April, when I stopped by the house to pick up some tax documents I'd left in the home office filing cabinet. I'd called ahead to let Marcus know I was coming, but no one answered the phone. Since I technically still owned the house, I used my key to let myself in, planning to grab the documents quickly and leave. What I found took my breath away. They had completely gutted my beautiful kitchen. The sage green cabinets I'd painted so carefully were gone, replaced by stark white modern units that looked like they belonged in a sterile showroom. The quartz countertops that had been my pride and joy were covered with dust and debris. Workers were installing new stainless steel appliances that looked expensive and completely out of character with the house's original charm. I stood in the doorway clutching my purse, staring at the destruction of the space where Marcus and I had shared so many meals and conversations. This wasn't updating or refreshing. This was complete demolition of everything I'd created. "Oh, Mrs. Hartwell." Ashley appeared from the living room, looking slightly guilty but not apologetic. "Marcus said you might stop by today." "What happened to my kitchen?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're renovating," she said matter-of-factly. "The old kitchen was so dated. We're bringing it into the 21st century." "That kitchen wasn't dated. I renovated it myself just 5 years ago. Every cabinet, every tile, every fixture was chosen carefully and installed with love." Ashley's expression showed mild annoyance, as if my emotional reaction was unreasonable. "Well, it didn't really match our style. Don't worry, we're paying for all the renovations ourselves. It's not costing you anything." That wasn't the point, and she knew it. The point was that they were erasing my life's work without even consulting me. The point was that they were treating my home like their personal renovation project, instead of respecting what I'd built there. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "At work. He'll be so excited to show you the plans for the new design. We're opening up the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create more of an open concept flow." They were planning to tear down walls now. Structural changes to my house without my permission or input. I felt dizzy with shock and anger. "Ashley, this is still my house. You can't make major renovations without discussing them with me first." "But we're living here," she replied, her tone becoming defensive. "We have to be comfortable in our own home. Marcus said you wanted us to treat it like it was ours." "I wanted you to feel welcome and comfortable. not to tear it apart and rebuild it according to your preferences. Ashley crossed her arms and looked at me with undisguised irritation. Mrs. Hartwell, I think you're being a little unreasonable. We're improving the house. When we eventually move out, these renovations will increase the property value significantly. I don't care about property value. I care about the home I spent years creating being destroyed without my consent. Look, Ashley said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. I understand this is hard for you. Change is difficult, especially when you're older and set in your ways. But Marcus and I are young and building our future together. We need a space that reflects who we are, not who you used to be. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. Who I used to be. As if my role in this house, in Marcus's life, was something from the past rather than an ongoing reality. I walked through the rest of the house in stunned silence. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself were covered with protective plastic, but I could see gouges and scratches from the construction work. The walls had new holes where they were apparently planning to run updated electrical wiring. My beloved dining room was stacked with boxes of new light fixtures and cabinet hardware. In the living room, I noticed that my grandmother's antique dresser was missing from its usual spot near the front window. Where's my grandmother's dresser? I asked Ashley. Oh, that old thing? We donated it to Goodwill. It really didn't fit with the new aesthetic we're going for. I felt like I might faint. You donated my grandmother's dresser? That piece has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was that important to you. Marcus said you wouldn't mind. We needed the space for our new entertainment center. She gestured to a massive black television stand that dominated the wall where my grandmother's beautiful oak dresser had sat for 15 years. The piece that had held my mother's china, that had survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars, that had been lovingly polished and cared for by 4 generations of women in my family, was gone. Donated to strangers like it was worthless junk. I sat down heavily on the sofa, the one piece of furniture they apparently hadn't replaced yet, and tried to process what was happening. This wasn't temporary housing while they saved for their own place. This was a complete takeover of my life, my home, my history. Mrs. Hartwell, are you okay? Ashley asked, though her tone suggested she was more annoyed by my reaction than concerned about my well-being. I need to speak with Marcus, I said quietly. He's at work. I can have him call you tonight. No, I need to speak with him now. This can't wait. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus's office number. When he answered, I could hear the sounds of a busy workplace in the background. Hi, Mom, what's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something. Marcus, I'm at the house. I need to talk to you about what you and Ashley are doing here. Oh, you saw the kitchen renovation? Isn't it going to be amazing? Ashley has such incredible design sense. Marcus, you gutted my kitchen without asking me. You donated my grandmother's dresser without telling me. You're making structural changes to my house like it belongs to you. There was a pause, and I could hear him moving to a quieter location. Mom, I thought we talked about this. Ashley and I are living there now. We need to make it work for us. We talked about you living there temporarily while you saved for your own place. We never talked about you demolishing everything I built and replacing it with your preferences. We're not demolishing anything, Marcus said, his voice taking on an impatient edge. We're updating and improving. The house needed work anyway. The house did not need work. I maintained it beautifully for 20 years. Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just cosmetic stuff. When we move out, you'll have a completely modernized house that's worth way more than what you put into it. I don't want a modernized house. I want my home back the way I made it. Marcus sighed audibly. Look, I really can't talk about this right now. I'm at work, and I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Can we discuss this tonight? Marcus, they threw away my grandmother's dresser. Ashley mentioned you might be upset about that. I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd mind. It was just taking up space, and it didn't really go with anything else. Just taking up space. My family heirloom was just taking up space in my own house. We'll talk tonight, Marcus said curtly and hung up before I could respond. I sat in my transformed living room, surrounded by the debris of my former life, and realized that my son had changed in ways I'd never imagined possible. The boy who used to help me refinish furniture and paint walls, who used to beam with pride when friends complimented our home, had become someone who saw my life's work as obstacles to be cleared away. Ashley was watching me from the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of irritation and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you understand that Marcus and I are just trying to build our life together. We're not trying to hurt your feelings, but we can't live in a museum to your past." A museum to my past, that's how she saw the home I'd spent decades creating. The spaces where I'd raised my son and built our life together. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 57 years in my aching joints. "I need some time to think about this," I said. "Of course," Ashley replied, her tone suggesting she thought I was being overly dramatic and unreasonable. I drove back to my small apartment in a daze. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed to create a beautiful home for my son, was being casually destroyed by people who saw it as nothing more than an inconvenient starting point for their own vision. That evening, Marcus called as promised. But instead of the apologetic, understanding conversation I'd hoped for, he was defensive and dismissive. "Mom, I think you're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. Ashley and I are putting a lot of our own money into improving the house. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" "Marcus, they destroyed my kitchen and threw away my grandmother's furniture. They updated the kitchen and made space for things we actually use. And I'm sorry about the dresser, but it was old and didn't really fit with our style." "Your style? Marcus, this is my house. I'm letting you live there temporarily, not giving you permission to remodel it according to your preferences." "But we are living there," Marcus said, his voice rising with frustration. "We're not visitors or guests. This is our home now. We have to be able to live comfortably." "For how long?" I asked. "Originally you said you'd stay there while you saved for a down payment on your own place. It's been almost a year, and instead of saving money, you're spending thousands on renovations." "We are saving money. And the renovations are an investment in the property. When we eventually buy our own place, the house will be worth significantly more because of the improvements we're making." "What if I don't want those improvements? What if I want my house back the way it was?" There was a long pause before Marcus answered, and when he did, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom, I think you need to be realistic about the situation. Ashley and I are young professionals with good incomes and excellent credit. We're taking care of all the expenses and maintaining the property beautifully. We're not going anywhere anytime soon." The implication was clear. They were established in my house, and they had no intention of leaving. I was the one who would need to adjust my expectations, not them. "Marcus, are you saying you don't plan to move out and buy your own place?" "I'm saying we're happy where we are, and we're making the house everything it could be." Ashley has incredible vision for the space. What about my vision for the space? What about the 20 years I spent making it into a home? "Mom, you need to let go of the past. The house is moving forward with or without your approval." After that conversation, I barely slept for 3 days. I kept replaying Marcus's words, trying to understand how my sweet, grateful son had become someone who could speak to me with such casual disrespect. How had the boy who used to thank me for every sacrifice I made become a man who dismissed my feelings as inconvenient obstacles to his plans? I started paying closer attention to the financial aspects of our arrangement. Marcus and Ashley were supposed to be covering the mortgage payments, insurance, and utilities. But when I reviewed my bank statements, I noticed that the automatic mortgage payment was still coming out of my account. When I called Marcus to ask about it, he was evasive. "We're handling it a different way," he said. "Ashley's family accountant suggested we structure things differently for tax purposes." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means we're paying you directly instead of paying the mortgage company. Same amount of money, just better for everyone's tax situation." But I wasn't receiving any money from them. When I pointed this out, Marcus became irritated. "Mom, we're putting thousands of dollars into renovations. That's way more than the monthly mortgage payment. You're actually coming out ahead." "But I didn't ask for renovations. I asked for help with the monthly expenses so I could afford my apartment rent. You're getting improvements to your property that are worth more than cash. You should be thanking us." The conversation went in circles. with Marcus insisting that their unauthorized improvements were more valuable than the financial help they'd promised, and me trying to explain that I needed actual money to pay my bills, not kitchen renovations I'd never requested. Things got worse when I discovered they'd started renting out my basement as a short-term rental through an online platform. I found out completely by accident when my neighbor Frank mentioned seeing strangers coming and going from the house at odd hours. "I hope you know what you're doing with that rental business," Frank said during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Some of those people parking in front of your house look pretty rough." "What rental business?" I asked. Frank looked confused. "The basement apartment. Marcus told me you were renting it out to help with expenses." I drove to the house immediately, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. Using my key, I went down to the basement and found it completely transformed. They'd installed a separate entrance, added a small kitchenette, and furnished it like a studio apartment. There were clear signs of recent occupancy: unmade beds, dirty dishes, personal belongings left behind by guests. When I confronted Marcus about it, he was unapologetic. "It's just a way to generate some extra income from unused space," he said. "The basement was just sitting empty anyway. You turned my basement into a rental unit without asking me? You're running a business out of my house without my permission?" "It's not a big deal, Mom. Ashley found this great platform where people can rent unique spaces for short stays. We're making really good money, and it's helping us save faster for our own place." "How much money?" "Well, after expenses and fees, we're clearing about $1,200 a month." $1,200 a month that was going directly into their pockets while I struggled to pay my apartment rent. Money they were making by using my property as a commercial venture without my consent or participation. "Marcus, if you're making money off my house, I should be getting that income. We're the ones doing all the work. Ashley manages the bookings. I clean between guests. We bought all the furniture and supplies. You're not involved in any of it. Because you never asked me to be involved. You just decided to start a business using my property." "Mom, you're being unreasonable again. We're taking good care of everything. And the rental income is helping us save for our future. I thought you wanted us to be financially responsible." The circular logic was maddening. They were using my house to generate income while I struggled financially, but somehow I was the one being unreasonable for objecting to their unauthorized business venture. That's when I started making phone calls, first to my lawyer, then to the city planning office, then to my insurance company. What I learned made my blood run cold. The basement rental required permits they hadn't obtained. It violated zoning laws for residential properties. It potentially voided my homeowner's insurance if guests were injured on the property. The structural changes they'd made to create the separate entrance required building permits and inspections that had never been completed. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just disrespecting my wishes. They were potentially exposing me to serious legal and financial liability. If a guest was injured in the unpermitted basement apartment, I could be sued for everything I owned. If the city discovered the zoning violations, I could face fines and be forced to cease the rental operation immediately. When I presented this information to Marcus, he dismissed my concerns. "Ashley's family has lawyers who handle this kind of stuff all the time. They know what they're doing. Then why didn't they get the proper permits?" "Because it's just temporary, and the permit process takes forever. By the time we move out, we'll convert everything back." "Marcus, I could lose my house if something goes wrong. I could be sued if someone gets hurt down there." "Nothing's gonna go wrong. Ashley researches all the guests carefully before accepting their bookings." He wasn't getting it. Or maybe he was getting it, and simply didn't care about the risks he was creating for me. Either way, I realized that my son had become someone I barely recognized, someone who put his own convenience above my safety and security. The final straw came when I received a notice from my mortgage company. I'd been late on the last 2 payments, and they were threatening to begin foreclosure proceedings if I didn't bring the account current immediately. I called Marcus in a panic. "The mortgage company says I'm behind on payments. I thought you were handling that." "We are handling it. There might be some confusion with the timing of transfers. I'll take care of it." "Marcus, they're threatening foreclosure. This isn't a timing issue." "Mom, calm down. I said I'll handle it." But he didn't handle it. A week later, I received another notice. more urgent than the first. When I tried to call Marcus, he didn't answer his phone for 2 days. When he finally called back, his explanation was vague and unsatisfying. There's been some confusion with Ashley's family accountant about how to structure the payments. It's getting sorted out. How long will it take to sort out? Soon. Don't worry about it. But I was worried. I was terrified. The house that represented my entire life's savings, my security, my future, was at risk of foreclosure because my son wasn't making the payments he'd promised to make. I went to the bank in person to discuss the situation with a loan officer. What I learned there changed everything. "Mrs. Hartwell," the loan officer said, looking at my account history on her computer screen, "I see that you've added your son as an authorized user on this account." "What do you mean?" "According to our records, Marcus Hartwell was added to your mortgage account 6 months ago with full access to make changes to the loan terms. I had never authorized that. I had never signed any papers adding Marcus to my mortgage account. But somehow, he had legal access to my loan." "How is that possible?" I asked. The loan officer pulled up more detailed records. "It looks like he came in with power of attorney documents giving him authority to manage your financial affairs." Power of attorney documents? I had never signed power of attorney documents giving Marcus control over my finances. But somehow, he had convinced the bank that he had that authority. "I need to see those documents," I said. What the loan officer showed me made my hands shake with anger and betrayal. The signature on the power of attorney papers looked like mine, but I had never signed them. Someone had forged my signature to gain legal control over my mortgage account. "Ma'am, are you saying these documents are fraudulent?" the loan officer asked, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. "I'm saying I never signed these papers and I never gave my son power of attorney." The loan officer immediately called bank security and began the process of investigating potential fraud. Within an hour, I was sitting with a detective who specialized in financial crimes, filing a police report against my own son. The investigation moved quickly once it began. Bank records showed that Marcus had used his fraudulent power of attorney to access my account multiple times. He'd taken out a home equity line of credit against my house without my knowledge, borrowing against the equity I'd built over 20 years of payments. The money from that loan had funded their kitchen renovation and basement conversion. He'd also attempted to refinance the mortgage in his own name, essentially trying to steal the house from me legally. That transaction had been delayed by banking procedures, which was why the original mortgage payments had stopped being made. He'd been expecting to take over the loan entirely and cut me out of ownership of my own home. When the detective called Marcus to ask him to come in for questioning, he finally revealed the full scope of his betrayal. "Look," Marcus said during what he thought was a casual conversation, "my mom is getting older, and she's not really capable of managing property anymore. Ashley and I are just trying to help her transition to a more appropriate living situation. And she agreed to transfer the house to you? Not exactly, but she clearly wasn't using it effectively. We're young professionals who can really maximize the property's potential." The detective's notes from that conversation would later become key evidence in the fraud case. Marcus had essentially admitted that he'd taken control of my house without my permission because he thought he could use it better than I could. When Ashley found out about the police investigation, she finally showed her true colors completely. "Your mother is trying to ruin our lives," she told Marcus, not knowing that the detective was recording their phone conversations with a court order. "We've put so much work into that house, and now she wants to take it all away from us." "Maybe we should just give it back to her," Marcus said, sounding tired and defeated. "Absolutely not. We have rights. We've been living there for over a year. We've made improvements. We've established residency. She can't just kick us out because she changed her mind about the arrangement. Ashley, we forged her signature. We took out loans against her house without her permission. That's not how I'd describe it. You were helping your mother manage her affairs because she was clearly overwhelmed." Even faced with criminal charges, Ashley was still trying to reframe their fraud as a favor they'd done for me. She'd convinced herself that stealing my house was actually an act of kindness. The day they were arrested was both satisfying and heartbreaking. I watched from my apartment window as police cars pulled up to my house and officers walked Marcus and Ashley out in handcuffs. My neighbors came out of their houses to see what was happening, and I felt embarrassed that my family drama was playing out so publicly. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in months: vindicated. I wasn't crazy or unreasonable or overly attached to the past. I was a woman whose son had committed serious crimes against her, and finally someone in authority was taking that seriously. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Marcus and Ashley hired expensive lawyers with money I later learned came from selling my grandmother's dresser and other pieces of my furniture. They tried to claim that everything they'd done was part of a verbal agreement we'd made, that I'd given them permission to manage my affairs because I was experiencing early-stage dementia. Their lawyers produced witnesses who testified that I'd seemed confused and forgetful during conversations about the house. Most of these witnesses were Ashley's friends and family members who had barely met me, but they swore under oath that I'd appeared mentally incompetent during brief social interactions. The character assassination was devastating. People I'd known for years began looking at me differently, wondering if maybe there was some truth to the claims that I was losing my mental faculties. The stress of the legal battle and the public questioning of my competence took a toll on my health and my relationships. But the evidence was clear. Bank records, phone recordings, digital communications, and forensic analysis of the forged documents all supported my version of events. Marcus and Ashley had systematically defrauded me out of my home and my financial security while convincing themselves they were doing it for my own good. The day Marcus finally accepted a plea agreement was the day I truly understood that my son was gone. Not physically dead, but the person I'd raised and loved unconditionally had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could look me in the eye and claim he'd stolen from me out of love. As I sat in that courtroom listening to him allocute to his crimes, I realized that Ashley hadn't corrupted my son. She'd simply revealed who he really was underneath the polite, grateful facade he'd maintained throughout his childhood. The real Marcus was someone who believed he was entitled to whatever he wanted, including his mother's life work, because he could use it more effectively than she could. The house was returned to me legally, but the damage was extensive. The unauthorized renovations would cost thousands to repair or remove. The basement rental operation had left the space damaged and dirty. The beautiful kitchen I'd created had been destroyed beyond repair. But more than the physical damage was the emotional devastation of realizing that my own son had been planning to steal everything I'd worked for. The boy I'd raised to be honest and kind and grateful had become a man who saw my love and trust as weaknesses to be exploited. The worst part was that he still didn't think he'd done anything wrong. Even after pleading guilty to fraud and identity theft, Marcus maintained that he'd been trying to help me by taking control of my life. In his mind, he was the victim of an ungrateful mother who couldn't appreciate his efforts to improve her situation. Standing in my damaged house after Marcus and Ashley moved out, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every room held evidence of their occupation, their dismissal of my taste and choices, their casual destruction of things I'd held dear. The warm, welcoming spaces I'd created had been replaced by cold, modern efficiency that had no soul or character. But as I walked through each room, assessing the damage and planning repairs, I felt something unexpected: relief. For the first time in almost 2 years, I was alone in my own house. I could make decisions about paint colors and furniture placement without asking anyone's permission. I could choose how to spend my money and my time without having to justify my choices to people who saw my preferences as obstacles to their superior vision. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. I'd learned that I could survive the worst thing I'd ever imagined: the complete betrayal by the child I'd devoted my life to raising. I'd discovered that I was stronger and more resourceful than I'd given myself credit for. And I'd realized that my worth wasn't determined by my son's opinion of me or his appreciation for my sacrifices. As I stood in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the debris of their renovation, I started making plans. Not just plans to repair the damage they'd done, but plans to rebuild my life on my own terms. Plans that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or gratitude or understanding. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like myself again. Hurt and scarred, but fundamentally intact. Ready to reclaim not just my house, but my life. The restoration of my house became my new mission, but not in the way Marcus and Ashley had envisioned. Instead of simply repairing the damage they'd caused, I decided to transform the space into something entirely new, something that reflected who I was now, not who I'd been when I was trying to create the perfect home for an ungrateful child. I started with the kitchen, the heart of the devastation. Rather than trying to recreate my original sage green cabinets, I chose a deep navy blue that felt sophisticated and calming. Instead of the quartz countertops I'd saved so long to afford, I splurged on butcher block that would age beautifully and show the character that comes from daily use. The subway tile backsplash was replaced with intricate mosaic work in blues and greens that reminded me of ocean waves. The renovation became a form of therapy. Every decision I made was mine alone, based on my preferences and no one else's opinion. I didn't have to consider whether Marcus would approve or whether Ashley would find it sufficiently modern. I chose materials and colors that spoke to me, that made me feel peaceful and happy in my own space. Frank, my neighbor, stopped by one afternoon while I was installing new cabinet hardware. He'd been one of the few people who'd supported me throughout the legal ordeal, never questioning my mental competence or suggesting that maybe Marcus had been trying to help. "Eleanor, this kitchen is going to be stunning," he said, admiring the deep blue cabinets. "You've got a real eye for design." "Thank you, Frank. It feels good to be creating something beautiful again. I have to ask though, aren't you worried about what this is costing? I know the legal fees and everything must have been expensive." I set down my screwdriver and looked at him seriously. "Frank, I spent 20 years trying to save money and be practical and make smart financial decisions for my son's future. And what did that get me? A child who thought he was entitled to steal everything I'd worked for because he could use it better than I could." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "So now you're spending money on yourself." "Now I'm investing in my own happiness. I'm 57 years old, I own my house free and clear, and I have no dependents. If I want beautiful countertops and custom tile work, I'm going to have them." It was liberating to make financial decisions based on what would bring me joy rather than what would be most practical for some hypothetical future. I hired professionals for the complex electrical work and plumbing, but I did much of the finishing work myself. I learned to grout tile properly, to install crown molding, to hang wallpaper without bubbles or seams showing. Each skill I acquired felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been dormant during the years when I'd focused entirely on being Marcus's mother. I wasn't just renovating my house, I was rediscovering my own capabilities and interests. The dining room got the most dramatic transformation. I removed the wall between it and the living room, creating the open concept space that Ashley had wanted, but executing it according to my own vision. Instead of the stark, modern aesthetic she'd preferred, I created a warm, flowing space with rich wood tones and comfortable seating areas that invited conversation and relaxation. The focal point became a stunning built-in bookshelf that covered one entire wall. I'd always been a reader, but during Marcus's childhood I'd relegated my books to a small shelf in the bedroom, making space for his sports equipment and school projects. Now I had room to display my entire collection, organized by genre and author, with space for the many books I planned to acquire. In the center of the bookshelf, I placed a framed photograph of myself taken on a recent trip to New England. I'd started traveling, something I'd always wanted to do but had never felt I could afford while saving for Marcus's future. The photo showed me standing in front of a covered bridge in Vermont, smiling genuinely for the camera, looking confident and content. The living room furniture was completely replaced. Instead of the burgundy leather sofa that had been chosen for durability and practicality, I bought a comfortable sectional in a rich emerald green that made me feel like I was sitting in a jewel. I added an antique Persian rug found at an estate sale, its intricate patterns and deep colors adding warmth and sophistication to the space. Most importantly, I filled the house with things that had meaning to me personally, rather than things chosen for their family-friendly practicality. I bought original artwork from local artists, pieces that spoke to me rather than safe, neutral prints chosen to offend no one. I displayed ceramics and glassware I'd collected over the years, but had kept safely stored away while Marcus was growing up. The master bedroom became my sanctuary in a way it had never been before. I painted it a deep burgundy color that felt rich and enveloping. I bought the most comfortable mattress I could find, with high-quality linens in colors I loved. I installed a reading nook by the window with a comfortable chair and good lighting, creating a perfect spot for my evening reading ritual. For the first time in my adult life, I decorated a bedroom solely for my own comfort and pleasure. There were no considerations about whether the color scheme would work if I ever remarried, no practical concerns about hiding wear and tear from children's activities. It was purely a space designed to make me happy. The transformation extended beyond just the physical spaces. I started hosting dinner parties for friends I'd neglected during the years when my social life revolved around Marcus's activities and schedule. Women from work, neighbors I'd known for years but never really connected with, new friends I'd met through community activities. My first dinner party was terrifying and exhilarating. I'd chosen a menu of dishes I loved but had never served to guests because they seemed too exotic or complicated. I set the table with china I'd inherited from my mother but had never used because it seemed too fancy for everyday family meals. I lit candles and played music I enjoyed rather than background noise that wouldn't interfere with conversation. 8 women came that evening, ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s. Some were divorced, some widowed, some never married, some still married but with grown children. What we all had in common was that we were in a phase of life where we could focus on our own interests and relationships rather than everyone else's needs. The conversation flowed easily among these women who understood the particular challenges and freedoms that come with being past the intensive mothering phase of life. We talked about books and travel and careers and dreams we'd deferred while raising families. We laughed until my sides hurt and shared stories we'd never told our children. "Eleanor, this house is absolutely gorgeous," said Janet from work, admiring the new kitchen. "You've created something really special here." "Thank you. It's been therapeutic, rebuilding everything exactly the way I want it." "I remember when you were living in that tiny apartment," added my neighbor Carol. "I was so worried about you during all that legal mess with Marcus." "It was the hardest thing I've ever been through," I admitted. "But it also taught me that I'm much stronger than I thought I was." "And more creative," said Susan, another dinner guest. "I had no idea you were so talented at interior design." "Neither did I. I spent so many years making practical choices and compromising on what I really wanted that I'd forgotten I had my own sense of style." The evening lasted until nearly midnight, with several women saying it was the most enjoyable social gathering they'd attended in years. We decided to make it a monthly tradition, taking turns hosting and trying new recipes and wine pairings. These dinner parties became the foundation of a social life I'd never had as a single mother. During Marcus's childhood, my social interactions had been limited to other parents at school events and brief conversations with coworkers. I'd never had the time or energy to develop deep friendships with women my own age who shared my interests. Now I was part of a book club, a hiking group, and a community garden project. I was taking classes in watercolor painting and Italian cooking. I was volunteering at the animal shelter and the literacy program at the library. I was building a life that was rich and fulfilling and entirely my own. The most surprising development was romantic. I'd assumed that at 57, after the devastating betrayal by my son, I wasn't interested in dating or relationships. I'd grown comfortable with solitude and independence, and the idea of opening myself up to potential hurt seemed foolish. But then I met Robert at the community garden. He was a retired teacher, recently widowed, who had started gardening as a way to cope with grief. We were assigned adjacent plots, and our friendship developed slowly over shared conversations about soil composition and pest control. Robert was kind and patient, in ways that reminded me how long it had been since anyone had treated me with consistent consideration. He listened when I talked about my struggles with Marcus, offering perspective without trying to minimize my pain or rush me toward forgiveness. "I can't imagine how difficult it must be to have your own child betray your trust so completely," he said one afternoon as we worked side by side weeding our vegetable plots. "The hardest part is that he still doesn't think he did anything wrong. In his mind, he was helping me by taking control of my life because I wasn't managing it properly." "That sounds like someone who's been influenced by a very manipulative person," Robert observed. "Your son might not be entirely lost. Sometimes people can change when they're removed from toxic influences." Maybe, I said, though I wasn't ready to consider the possibility of reconciliation. Right now I'm focusing on my own healing and rebuilding. That's probably the healthiest approach. You can't fix relationships with people who don't acknowledge they've done anything wrong. Robert never pushed for more than friendship, but gradually our relationship deepened naturally. We started having dinner together after working in the garden. We went to movies and concerts and art exhibitions. We took day trips to farmers markets and antique stores in neighboring towns. He was impressed by the transformation of my house and interested in my creative projects in a way that felt genuine rather than polite. When I showed him the photo albums documenting the renovation process, he studied each picture carefully and asked thoughtful questions about my design choices. "You have real talent for this," he said, looking at before and after photos of the kitchen. "Have you ever considered doing interior design professionally? At my age, I don't have any formal training or credentials." "You have something better than credentials. You have an eye for beauty and the skills to execute your vision. Plus, you understand what it's like to live in a space long-term, not just how to make it look good for photographs." His suggestion planted a seed that grew into an unexpected new career. I started helping friends with their decorating projects, then friends of friends, then strangers who found me through word of mouth. I wasn't trying to build a business, just sharing knowledge and skills I'd developed through my own projects. But people were willing to pay for my time and expertise, and I discovered I had a talent for helping others create spaces that reflected their personalities and needs. I understood the difference between decorating for show and decorating for living, between following trends and creating timeless comfort. Within 6 months, I had more requests for help than I could handle with my part-time approach. I made the decision to leave my job at the hospital and start my own design consulting business. It was terrifying and exhilarating to reinvent my career at 58, but I'd learned that taking risks was often the path to the greatest rewards. My first major client was a woman going through a divorce who wanted to transform the family home into a space that felt entirely her own. The parallels to my own situation were obvious, and I was able to help her not just with paint colors and furniture placement, but with the emotional process of reclaiming her identity through her environment. "You understand exactly what I'm going through," she said as we planned the renovation of her bedroom. "You know how important it is to surround yourself with things that make you feel strong and beautiful." "I do understand," I replied. "Your home should be a reflection of who you are now, not who you used to be, or who someone else thinks you should be." The business grew quickly through referrals and word of mouth. I was careful not to take on more work than I could handle well, focusing on quality rather than quantity. Each project was an opportunity to help someone create a space that supported their best life, and I found the work deeply satisfying in ways my hospital job had never been. The financial independence was gratifying, but more important was the sense of purpose and creativity that came with work that aligned with my natural talents and interests. I was making a living doing something I loved, something I was genuinely good at, something that made other people's lives better. As my business grew, I started getting inquiries from potential clients who lived too far away for me to work with directly. That led to the idea of writing a book about designing spaces for the second half of life, focusing on creating homes that supported the interests and needs of people whose children had grown and left. The book project became a way to reach more people while also documenting my own journey from devastated single mother to confident independent woman. I wrote about the practical aspects of interior design, but also about the emotional and psychological benefits of creating spaces that truly reflect your authentic self. Designing After Divorce, Death, and Disappointment was published 2 years after Marcus's conviction. The title was suggested by my editor, who felt it captured the reality that many people face major life transitions that require not just emotional healing, but also physical transformation of their living spaces. The book was more successful than I'd expected, leading to speaking engagements and magazine articles and television interviews. I was invited to design showcase rooms and judge design competitions. I was consulted by manufacturers who wanted to create products that met the needs of mature homeowners who were redesigning their lives. Through all of this professional success, I remained in contact with Marcus only through his lawyer. He'd served 18 months in minimum security prison and was now on probation, living in a halfway house and working at a furniture warehouse. Ashley had received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with prosecutors, But their marriage had not survived the legal proceedings. According to the updates I received through legal channels, Marcus was required to attend counseling as part of his probation. His therapist had reportedly helped him begin to understand the extent of his betrayal and the damage he'd caused to our relationship. He'd written several letters apologizing for his actions, but his lawyer had advised him not to send them until his probation was complete. I wasn't sure I wanted to read those letters when they eventually arrived. The person who had committed fraud against me and tried to steal my house felt like a stranger, not the son I'd raised with such love and care. The Marcus I'd known would never have been capable of such calculated deception and cruelty. But occasionally I wondered if Robert was right, if my son might genuinely change when freed from Ashley's influence and forced to confront the consequences of his actions. I wasn't ready for reconciliation, and I might never be, but I was open to the possibility that someday he might become someone worthy of my forgiveness. The house that had been the battleground for our relationship was now completely mine in every sense. Every room reflected my choices, my taste, my vision of how I wanted to live. The spaces that had once been designed around the needs of a growing boy were now configured for the life of a mature woman who understood her own preferences and priorities. I kept one photograph of Marcus in the house, a picture of him at age 8, on the day we'd moved in. In it, he was grinning with gap-toothed joy, arms spread wide in the living room, claiming his territory in our new home. I remembered how excited he'd been, how grateful for everything I'd worked to provide for him. That little boy felt like a different person from the man who had tried to steal my house and forge my signature. Sometimes I grieved for that child as if he had died, because in many ways he had. The sweet, grateful son I'd raised had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who valued things more than relationships and saw my love as weakness to be exploited. But I no longer defined myself by my failure to raise a better man. I'd done my best with the knowledge and resources I had at the time. Marcus's choices as an adult were his responsibility, not mine. I couldn't control whether he learned from his mistakes or continued to blame others for the consequences of his actions. What I could control was my own life, my own choices, my own happiness. And for the first time since Marcus was born, those were my only responsibilities. I could pursue my interests, build my relationships, and create my environment based solely on what brought me joy and fulfillment. The dinner parties continued monthly, growing into a close-knit group of women who supported each other through the challenges and celebrated the victories that come with claiming your own life after years of focusing on others. We traveled together, took classes together, and created traditions that had nothing to do with family obligations or holiday expectations. Robert and I had settled into a comfortable relationship that enhanced both our lives without requiring either of us to compromise our independence. We maintained separate homes but spent most evenings together, cooking meals and working on projects and planning adventures. He respected my need to process my experience with Marcus at my own pace, and I appreciated his patience with my wariness about blending families or making promises about the future. On quiet evenings when I sat in my beautiful living room reading by the fireplace, I sometimes marveled at how completely my life had changed. 3 years earlier, I'd been living in a tiny apartment, devastated by my son's betrayal, convinced that my best years were behind me. I'd felt small and powerless and forgotten, erased from my own life by people who saw me as an obstacle to their plans. Now I was running a successful business, living in a house that was entirely my own creation, surrounded by friends who valued my opinion and sought my advice. I was traveling and learning and growing in ways I'd never imagined possible. I was happier and more confident than I'd ever been, even during the years when I'd thought I had everything I wanted. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had also freed me to become the person I was meant to be. Without the obligation to consider Marcus's needs and opinions, I'd discovered my own talents and preferences. Without the burden of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't respect me, I'd found the energy to build new relationships based on mutual appreciation and support. I still felt sad sometimes about losing my son, about the family traditions that would never be rebuilt, about the grandchildren I might never know, but I no longer felt angry or bitter about what he'd taken from me. Instead, I felt grateful for what his betrayal had given me, the opportunity to create a life that was completely and authentically mine. The house on Maple Street was still my home, but it was no longer the same place where I'd raised Marcus with such hope and sacrifice. It was something new and better, a space that reflected my journey from devastated victim to empowered woman, from selfless mother to fulfilled individual, from someone who defined herself through others to someone who knew her own worth. Standing in my kitchen on the anniversary of the day Marcus and Ashley had been arrested, I raised a glass of wine to toast not their downfall but my transformation. I'd survived the worst betrayal I could imagine and emerged stronger, wiser, and happier than before. The woman who had been shocked to find her belongings in a cardboard box on her own front porch was gone, replaced by someone who would never again allow others to define her value or determine her future. I'd learned that home wasn't something you created for other people. It was something you built for yourself, brick by brick, choice by choice, until every room reflected the life you'd chosen to live. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.